The 1912ers, and when there wasn't a city planner in Santa Fe, the business community did a great job with the City Different approach to the City Beautiful, right? Well, is it outdated? Many argue yes, many argue maybe, many argue no. The question would be then, that was 1912, let's fast forward to 2050, and what's the Santa Fe style going to be then? And if you went to your Preserving Place event, I know that Anthony kind of closed that with his shtick, which I think is very compelling, not because I necessarily agree with everything they do, but it causes people to immerse and think and see. And I was at the same table as Melanie, and we came up with a whole sort of post-dystopian community called Reflow. And the idea is H.G. Wells, War of the Worlds, the Morlocks, whoever the peaceful people are, I can't remember. The idea is there's a water-centric community somewhere down by what was the plaza, but they're still forging some continued threads of the Santa Fe style. And we came up with, Carlos with the county, it was the original progenitor of this, we came up with an idea that, this is kind of a water worshiping community, but they're performing a service with regard to the allocation of this scarce resource. And boy, is it still scarce. But there was a communal breakfast that we invented that created these almost shards, they harken back to they could be from the thin pottery of Acoma, Sky City. And the idea is water has such reverence. There are still, people's status is defined by how cool their water containers are they bring in the morning at this allocation breakfast about who's doing what today. Now that sounds pretty absurd in some sense, but it's that kind of visioning that can go way out. My visioning is not that far out, and there's going to be an exhibition opening next week, I think. And I was just, and I'm going to be in Seattle, but those AI pictures, I just was in touch with those guys, so the funky breakfast will be there. So that's an outlier attempt. I'm not there at all, but it shows how far people can go in revisioning what can be with regard to a place like this, which, unlike, as I say in the handout, everybody have a handout? John Penn Lafarge, in the Sleepy Dog book that everyone loves, his introduction says, New Mexico and Santa Fe have always been on, kind of the backside of nowhere, right? Well, my argument is, Santa Fe right now is very much on the front side of somewhere. And if we follow that evolution, we can see these threads. And before we go out and take an absolute position, we need to, every one of us, I believe, has an obligation to go out and see and look and apply what they see to ongoing activities, events, planning processes, debates about housing, all of that. So that's my fundamental premise, and I don't want to be preachy about it. I am not critical of the historical side at all. I just stack it in with all of the varied authenticities of what a place like Santa Fe is. I hate the word authenticity, as I will close with, but that's what we're going to talk about today. Introduction, background, and influences. Uncovering Santa Fe's innate identity. Tools for leveraging place. Conclusion, and question and answers. And so these are all my photos, and I've tried to sort of suggest through subtlety of photography, after all, we are on Canyon Road, some of the messages that I'm trying to communicate. So bear with me. I'm a relative newbie. I am not trying to tell anyone here anything other than these are the reflections of a person who's looked at this stuff kind of around the world, although I'm Asia deficient. I'm sure many of you are far more Asia sufficient than I am. And here we go. So somewhere in there, in the Palace of the Governors, is the answer. The replacement question. It's in the third book, and I'm not selling books here today, but I'm just, this is my world. Sustaining a city's culture and character. I wrote it when I was in England and Sweden. Oh my God, do I wish Santa Fe was a case study. As I told Chris Wilson, Myth of Santa Fe, dude, you wrote the book that I would love to write, or at least I would have loved to, have as a case study in here. Because the idea of this book is, you can't determine the DNA of a place by a touristic characterization or what people want to see or a particular position. You mush them all together, and in a co-creation way, something comes out. There's a question anywhere, not just here. How effective is city leadership in promoting that? Well, I know the consultants who are doing the plan and the update. I used to work with them. I've not talked to them. I know some of them have read my stuff. I wish there was more of an outreach like I'm going to tell you about. So, the replacement question is here. Imagine if the city around you disappeared and everything familiar in your daily life suddenly ceased to exist. Imagine the paths you walk and blah, 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 just disappeared. Well, guess what? I wrote that right before the pandemic. That's kind of what happened, right? The question becomes, how would you envision the new place? And this is actually a Gaza, post-World War II, Ukraine question. But how would you rebuild? And what I say here is, if in Athens, you're not going to rebuild based on ancient Athens, are you? Or you're not going to rebuild the London of Dickens, are you? Maybe some people want to, and that's okay. But the idea is to peel apart how we perceive. Now, this is a complex place. El Zaguan, and there's many El Zaguans here in Santa Fe, but this is a special place, and it has its own history that's detailed extensively in the other room, and you guys have programming on it, and I don't need to tell you this. This is the obelisk. Ha! No need to elaborate in terms of competing histories and the manifestation, the physical manifestation of what that is. And of course, the latest press is about, we think we lost some of the pieces, right? This is within the Palace of the Governors after the remodel, and I was taking some poetic shots through the Spanish figurines down the length, and okay, that's another history. And here, of course, is looking out of the palace and the jewelry sales dedicated to that purpose. So that's not all of Santa Fe, but it's a piece of it. Now, another important slide. You see Georgia, right? My tour guide at Abiquiu some time ago, and it was amazing because I was able to get a video of him saying it as we were looking out her iconic bedroom view. And I was outside, and this tour guide said she saw the world as shapes, right? We all know that about O'Keeffe. She saw the world as shapes. And so the question here is, this says, she saw the world as shapes. Then it says, what about the rest of us? How do you see the world? And what are the methods for purposefully figuring that out? And how to better engage with our environment as a whole without getting caught up in memes of, the McDonald's and the Vigas and the Portals and, are causing a housing crisis. It's not that simple, right? It's not that simple, but that's what, I saw that on Substack today. Some guy is writing about the problems on Cerrillos, and he, and some snarky comment like that. Well, okay, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about balancing all of this, because that is what I would argue needs to be done. That's what leveraging place is in my vocabulary. So, every one of these talks I've given for years, I use this, I've used this. We are not unique in our urban settlements, right? We eat, we buy things at the store, we have transport modes. We fight about what those transport modes should be. We fight about what's our access to the housing market now. But I argue, well, this is kind of the same place across the world. That is a shanty-like African street in Arusha, Tanzania. And it's a store. And there's a woman in front of the store holding her cell phone. And there's a guy selling something. And there's infrastructure. It's not our infrastructure. It's broken pavement. It's a high curb. What's that? Starbucks, Seattle, Washington. It's the same picture. There's a woman in front of it with her cell phone and the classic Starbucks tables and so on and so forth. So I've always used this photo to make the point, don't get too caught up in your own problems because everybody else has similar problems. What? In their own context. So context is a tremendously big word. The same place across the world. The Five and Dime in the plaza and a kind of multiple, kind of a convenience store in Arusha, Tanzania. So we can play this game both in my hometown of Seattle or where we all live now, presuming that all of you do live here or nearby. And it's not a big revelation, is it? But if you use these photos and begin to see the parallels in the underlying forces of what's going on, it might feel a little bit better sometimes. So I also have done it with forms, right? Where's that? I have door prizes, by the way. If someone guesses, you get a door prize. That's Edinburgh, right? Where's that? Mercer Island, Washington, a tony suburb of Seattle. Same place across the world in theory, but what it shows is the influence of perhaps architects who've studied the same thing, engineers who are familiar with the role of different street patterns. But this, how many of you have had, oh, this reminds me of moments? 1, 2, okay. Maybe after this maybe everybody will raise their hand. Chance for another door prize. Where's this? Paris, Place des Vosges. Where's that? The plaza. Well, guess what? That's what we all know, that the plaza and Peralta and the plaza and the military and the communal and the protective purpose derive from the same origins. And the Santa Fe Plaza, again, I hate authentic, I hate unique, but it really is, it's a social place. It's still a social place. American grid was a commercial endeavor. The national grid imposed in the Jeffersonian era. That's something that's really different here, and it carries through to today. So, let's talk a little bit about the style. You don't need to see these. But if I were talking to others, this is what I would say. It's important to make the point. Where SAR, right? Meme and others with the White Sisters now converted. Festival in the summer with the museum behind. And of course, La Fonda. These are very powerful images. That's what people love when they come here for 2 days. And that's what they remember. And that's why we newbies move here, right? And the imagery is not only powerful, it's extremely compelling. And just so you know, these will be a door prize when one of you answers something. Wait a minute, Larry, you get a door prize for. I'm sorry. So you know the point. I don't need to tell you what these are, but I am proud of catching the sun through the eye. That's the old word. That's the old term for it. But it can be misinterpreted or not, because in the famed barrio across the river, which you all know so well, and you just had an event there, and in San Miguel, and of course, the governor's palace. It can be misinterpreted because are these authentic? Or are these, is this and this is all drawn out in my little essay, is this a restoration or is it a revision based on perception at the time? Well, it's kind of both. This street goes so deep. Nobody needs, again, I'm going to keep saying this. I'm lecturing to the choir. This street goes so much deeper than any, or not any, but most streets in America. Why? It's not just remnant of Spanish conquest and, rebuilt after the Pueblo Rebellion. It's also, this was kind of a haven for the allies of the Spaniards, right? It was the northern, the folks who helped Cortes defeat the Aztecs, right? That's originally who this was for. And, this was a mixed ethnicity neighborhood, as you well know, for a long time. And this is what is really important to go deeper, I think, in the history of this place and what, in terms of compelling a future for it, I think you do need to look at that. Okay, door prize. But is it Disneyland? Is it Disneyland? If anybody is willing to say it is Disneyland, they get the framed door prize. No one wants it? Framed, savers, okay?
Yes, it is celebrated.
No, you know what, it's the Magic Kingdom, but look at it. There's the plaza and there's the castle, but that's the plaza and the cathedral, right? It's the same vibe. And is this Disneyland? No, of course it isn't. And here's why. I wasn't sure until I, last week, went to the Magic Kingdom and ate at Pecos Bill's, right? And then I went to Epcot, and the Vigas and the Portals, and it's all there, right? I would love to be a Disney architect, and it's like, okay, what's empty here? What's going on? Well, it lacks the histories, the embedded histories that I'm talking about. That, Larry, is celebration. Yeah, invented, of course, by the Disney folks with superstar architects, Stern and, Graves did the little post office, and, Venturi was there, and it's like, okay, but is it real, is it not real, and then what's real, and there are academics who look at this and they talk about, there really are fake real, real fake, there's all these classifications. And it's kind of like the style here. Well, it's a period in history, so why isn't it authentic? That's why I hate the word. Okay, that's celebration. And then we know when we see this that we're in Disneyland, right? But we see the Mesoamerican detail. And so I asked your neighbor, the Acequia Madre, and she said no. Now, why did the Acequia say no? By her very nature. More on that in a moment. Okay, so she also said no because here's the river right down there. Here's the Acequia down between the rail yards in Solana. Here is the cemetery off St. Francis that very few people who ever visit Santa Fe for 2 days know about, but those of you involved with the association and others know this is a big deal, the Guadalupe Cemetery. And this is what I love to look for, and this is what tells the story of the place in terms of figuring out where we go next. And to continue, someone like me, they go deep. Well, let's look at the Camino, let's look at the trail, let's look at the petroglyphs. Where? The ones by the airport. You've been there? You all been there? Quick walk. You kind of have to scramble a little bit. More Acequia Madre. And then, of course, on East Palace, 109 East Palace, you go in there and you go behind all the trinkets, and there's where Oppenheimer received all of the people who worked at the Manhattan Project, the secret, the office of the Manhattan Project. There's so much here. So backside of Nowhere? No. And then there's that which is much more current and subject to much more debate. And here we are on, College Plaza and Cerrillos and on Cerrillos and downtown. And this is a little bit of commercial, Valentina's and Salon Center, and Tiny's, of course. These are icons of a different sort and a different era. Andalitas, I love the Andalitas mural. I go and take photos of it all the time. And then we get a little wacky in the way that Anthony Guida and company like to say has created gentrification and so on and so forth, and it's unnecessary anymore, and what do we do next? Now, I'm not endorsing that. I'm just saying these are facts. People say this all the time. Where are we? Well, the Chevy dealer down on Cerrillos. Where's that? Best Buy, right? Embedded in Best Buy. McDonald's, which I saw the snarky comment on today. And is the 2-day visitor to Santa Fe going to think that's Santa Fe down towards 25? I don't think so. But this is why it's not Disneyland. Now, let's get to the meat. What are the tools for understanding the DNA, to coin an unoriginal phrase about what makes us who we are? Understanding innate identity, exploring connections and absences, and recognizing historical layers. Now, I remember, I've been coming to Santa Fe long enough that I remember when that really was a camera store, right? It's not so long ago, before Malus went, expanded. And this is Salon Center, which, in the co-op, and it's a little more, the real deal, right? Some would say. How do we, what's a system if you want to go out and really look into it further? Well, okay, I was an environmental land use lawyer for a long time. By a year ago fall, I was writing something called Capturing the Post-Pandemic City, the Power of Visual Prosecution, legal term. And that's what I'm foisting on you all. This is a father and son moment. My dad was an urban planning professor, and he loved to sketch and he loved to photograph. And this is Rovinj in Croatia. And so, of course, I'm a nerd by osmosis, right? Over and above whether I have a planning degree, which I do, and practice this kind of law. Embedded, right? So this is a bit of a personal story as well. I also have great homage to some friends of mine in the UK. There's a program in the UK that one of the leading urban designers in the UK developed several years ago, and it's in an app now. They've really updated it. It's called Place Check. And villages and towns around the UK ask a team to come in and lead the people around, and they have a list of questions they respond to, and it's not just architecture. And it's analog, it's not digital so much, but it really hits on many of the forces today that I've already identified. So if you're really interested in this stuff, is it in the handout? I don't know if it's in the handout, but Place Check in the UK is a great tool, and it's readily available. And I'm not saying that it's not done here, because the various organizations do things like this. They walk, they interpret, they have great tours. SAR has great tours that cost a lot, and all this kind of stuff. But this is a reason yours don't cost very much. But there's an accessibility here that I'm trying to communicate. So book number 1, which I am not selling, but this is the progression. I'm not selling, he says. Urbanism Without Effort. I wrote this when I was still very much a lawyer, and the osmosis from my dad was creeping out. And the idea is, and it was revised in 2019, the idea is return to underlying first principles. Like I said, this sort of archaeology of daily life, ethnography, some people would call it, but not quite. Focus on the interdisciplinary urbanism of the close grain. Emphasize the importance of the naturally occurring, the organic evolution. Argue for rediscovery of this simplicity as guidance going forward. I first wrote about this in The Atlantic in 2000 something, a long time ago. I wrote about an alley movie night in my then alley in the Madrona neighborhood in Seattle, because it was spontaneous. People sent an email and everybody got together and the kids did this and the blankets went out and a projector like the one that didn't work here started rolling, and there was a kids feature and then there was an adult feature. Was it a programmed movie in the park? No. From a zoning standpoint, absolutely illegal. They blocked the alley, so on and so forth. But it was a spontaneous community thing that I decided to call urbanism without effort. And then when I started talking about this, I remember a snarky guy in England and Scotland when I went over there, and I was like, Chuck, there is no such thing as urbanism without effort. And I said, okay, thank you. I just came 3,000 miles to tell these students about this, and I don't want them to think that way. That's what I said. You're absolutely right. Of course, urbanism takes great effort, but there is this naturally occurring underpinning that you can find here, like in the Asakias, over time. Diocletian's Palace in Split in Croatia. Who's been there? You been to Dubrovnik in Croatia? Who wants to fight for a door prize? Anyway, what happened? The Emperor Diocletian died. Barbarians at the gate overran Salona, which once was, I think, the second largest city in the Roman Empire. The inhabitants of Salona ran to the old walled palace of the emperor, and it became, over time, a city, right? And that's urbanism without effort, that natural evolution. Shelter in the wheel, the idea of wheeled vehicles and how they've evolved. Matera, which you may remember in the opening scene of the last James Bond movie, probably the most sustainable city in the world in Basilicata in Italy, during medieval times, and then fouled by the commercialism of the Renaissance, and these cave dwellings that go back from the external, current buildings. Who's been there? No door prize. Okay, and then my dad's sketch of Diocletian's Palace from above, just like Lucy Lippard says in the Santa Fe Through the Lens book that the museum put out some years ago, the importance of understanding Santa Fe from above. So I came up with the Urban Diary as a tool within Urbanism Without Effort. And everyone can become a city planner with the Urban Diary. This is very much in your handout, so I'm not going to belabor it other than the fundamental steps in the interest of time. If we apply it to Santa Fe, we learn, if we go out and look in the Urban Diary, whether you use photos, sketches, audio, video, notes, that the city is not a static entity. It adapts over time. And, the notion of Adobe maintenance versus a pure, versus, this idea that Adobe is sanctified and will remain forever. These things are complicated. The rail yard and Baca and how they're different and how they change the city. The Historic District Review Board and its many decisions, the Archaeological Review Committee and its many decisions, some disputed, some not. And Cerrillos and St. Michael's and Midtown and Pete's Place, no longer called Pete's Place, that's where the action is now, and how do you factor all this forward? This kind of says the same thing, you'll see it in the handout. Then came the second book, and the second book is all about how to do the Urban Diary. And I'm gonna run a video real quick, it's only 2 minutes long. Okay, this is a younger me, and you get a door prize if you say I haven't aged. This is about seeing the better city, the book. My name's Chuck Wolfe, and I wrote a book called Seeing the Better City. It's designed to help people look around. By looking around, I mean helping people express their perceptions about where they live, work, and visit in a way that's helpful
during times of urban change. My aim is to deliver really a comprehensive user's guide to interpreting the city dweller's world. A critical part of creating better cities is soliciting and incorporating input from those that know a place most intimately, the citizens that live and work there every day. My Urban Diary tool provides a way for everyone to easily document urban environments as well as to serve as a planning tool for city leadership. By and large, the tool today is really our smartphones. Our ability to share those photographs in social media and the ways in which in the smart city our social media photos are being used to analyze on a mega scale what our cities can be. I like to say that the book takes you from the Parisian wanderer, the flaneur, all the way up to Pokemon Go. The reason that's important is because we need to go back to the classic form of observation to really understand what we see when we look at buildings and streets and our transportation networks. What is our emotional reactions to that? You're going to go through the same process if you use your smartphone. The book spends a lot of time encouraging people to find vantage points around their city, what I like to call urban mirrors, so that they can observe human conduct in place and see behavior that's going to remind them of their own conduct. From such human observatories, we can really reflect on who we are.
Okay,
You haven't changed the bed.
you already got a door prize, but you get the frame going. A better city for whom? A lot of people have adopted this better city term, or, you know, we came up with it, I came up with it with a planning consultant from Austin named Lee Einsweiler. He and I talked about, well, when I was doing this book, what should we call it? And he came up with seeing the better city. So I give him credit in the book. Do you know Lee? Yeah, you do. So in any event, better city for whom? And here's the equity question. Here's the social justice question. Stockholm? Who's been to Stockholm? Anybody been to Stockholm? You want a door prize? You don't need a door prize. You've already gotten door prizes. Okay. So Ostermalm, the square that is probably the highest end part of downtown Stockholm in a high-end city. To keep my measurements pure, I'll speak in meters. So couples next to public art. This could be the plaza and the obelisk, although maybe it doesn't have the story of the obelisk. 200 meters away, 100 meters away, homeless on the sidewalk. And I can show you that same photo in the Place des Vosges, and we've all seen it everywhere. And so, you know, Cerrillos and St. Francis and the panhandling on the traffic islands is not just a Santa Fe issue. And, you know, it's around the world, some places worse than others contextually. But I really wanted to make clear that better city for whom? We're talking not just the pretty pictures, okay? Even though I like to take pretty pictures. Better city for whom? Loretto, the Plaza, and College Plaza on Cerrillos. It's a challenged person sitting, talking loudly on a cell phone with somebody else out scavenging. And it's the reality we see every day. So a better city for whom? And in Seattle, I said, look, if you look hard, you can get away from all this rhetoric. And I'll be quick here. Illegally varied sixplex on a street in Seattle. You know, the variance was issued illegally in the late 80s. But it looks like a single-family home. Single-family home. At that time, used exclusively for the storage of plumbing parts by a landlord in the neighborhood. So things aren't even as they seem. And you need to look hard to figure it out. It's this immersion, this action forcing that I'm trying to sell on you. And then this is a picture of a tent overlooking Lake Union in Seattle in a public park, effectively. Now, cities like Seattle got very open-minded post-pandemic, and it's okay for people to camp out in a public park, but a lot of people would say, that's crazy. Who has a right to that view? Who has a right to that view? Well, let's Santa Fe it, so to speak. Okay. Aldea. The style. A bunch of classy new urbanist architectural firms, Duanis, then Polizzotis, and a few developers. You all know better than I do. There's still no real center, is there? There's the plaza and a yoga place and a general store and a retirement place. But we've got to figure out, and this is where I get on the side of probably friends of Santa Fe architecture and Homesite and others, it would be good to figure out how to do this in a mix and match that works going forward. And here, Casa Solana-ish, the old style tract housing, if you will, we see all over the country. But it all depends on who's looking at what from which angle about what the better city is. That's my major point. Urban Diary, your tool for purposeful observation. I refer you to the handout. There's a tip sheet. There's all sorts of hints in there. And you don't need to buy the book. There's stuff online linked to in that article. But the idea is, however you like to observe, for me it's photography, go do it. And then try and make a difference. These are the steps. Choose the diary tool and so on. Choose your path. Use the lens method. Look, engage, narrate, and summarize. Isn't that cute for an acronym? And then finalize your conclusions. And here in Santa Fe, I have my suggestions, and it's in the handout on these 5 basic tips. I've done this kind of around the world, in Stockholm and Spokane, Washington, and Adelaide, Australia, and people get into it. I've not seen it realized as the regulatory and planning tool I really wanted, because I moved overseas and stopped pushing that in about 2018. But enough said for current purposes. Another graphic, look, explore, narrate, and summarize. It gives you ideas, but it's in the essay. Go out and smell Canyon Road during a festival. Listen to the noise in the plaza. Go do an urban diary on a block on Cerrillos, even if you don't want to. And so, it's leveraging Santa Fe context by these different approaches. And I pretty much presaged this with, Santa Fe identity, Solana Center and Casa Solana, distinctive everyday landscapes. Go to it's not just built environment, it's the Asakia path between the rail yards. It's the Dale Ball trails, it's you name it. It's the trails that that I don't, that give you this sense of what the place is that is actually within the city limits. So different contexts will give you different ideas. Avoid the traps. This is important, really important. Traps are nostalgia. Oh, remember our wedding in Paris? And that's what the Eiffel Tower is. Or who has the right to the view? We already covered that. And then this idea of juxtapositions. If you look to where people are fighting about things, it's often the juxtapositions between high and low, density and not density. Look for the juxtapositions, and you can see what's going on, the overlaps, the overlays. Lucy, who some of you may know, I'm sure you do. I've not met her, and my friend, great respect for her without ever having met her. Okay, the view from the dog park, right? What's next to the dog park? The Japanese Internment Memorial Monument. And I'm not preaching apology. I'm preaching there's several realities in one. So watch out for that nostalgia. Watch out for the aesthetics. Just think about the whole package of landscapes. Landscapes can be cultural. They can be a lot of things. And then the table which you have, it shows you a nice, the Santa Fe of your fantasies versus the Santa Fe that isn't so fantasy oriented versus what do we do about it? What do we do about it collectively? And then finally, I'm going to get to the third book. I dug deeper. I went beyond the two dimensions and I began to bring in these other landscapes that I've alluded to with regard to the absent stories in narrative. And one of them might be the Japanese internment memorial, whatnot. So there's that book. I have it show and tell. It's a different publisher than the first two, so I'm not sure it's among the two that these guys have available for you if you want, but it looked deeper. Urban Diary plus. And it looked at different media, art, science, or both, right, in terms of looking at the city and the varied ways we can understand the city. Who's been to Melbourne, Australia? Door prize. Which is the real Melbourne laneway? It's kind of like the Five and Dime versus Arusha. In Australia, people said both. And the answer is no, that's the real one. This is a replication by a developer in Seattle, former client actually. So what? I would say it's fine. People like it, but just recognize what's going on here. Same deal. These umbrellas that started in Portugal, in Aveiro in Portugal in about 2011, big placemaking device. Basically, they went around the world. They, all of a sudden, in airport concourses on a path to a beach in Zanzibar. It drove me nuts. And people say, what's your problem? They're cheap. People like them. And it's like, well, they're out of context. They're out of context. And they actually had a purpose in Portugal as a shade device. And yeah, it was public art, but it was also shade. And people told me to cool off, so I did. That's what this book is about. No way you're going to be able to read this. Learn, new acronym. Look, engage, assess, review, and negotiate. It takes you deeper than just the two dimensions. And then to get really dorky, I talk about a particular view in Richmond, London, UK, home of what?
Ted Lasso.
Yes.
Do I get another door prize?
Yeah.
I can will it to somebody.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if there's one more opportunity. Anyway, I looked at this iconic corner and I said, hey, look at all the ways to look at this. It's not just the architecture. It's like what's underneath. Look at the tech kiosk. Look at da-da-da-da-da. Go up to the sky. Go down below. Blah, 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 blah. That's in the book. As is this chart. As is this list in this wacky juxtaposition in Reading, England, United Kingdom, of all the ways that people look at cities. Tech-wise, ethnographically, and just these multiple ways. The Urban Diary is your personal way. And I compared the greening of Paris with the Urban National Park in Stockholm. Different ways of greening, right? In their own contexts. And this is Stockholm. And if you've never been to the national, it's in the city. It's amazing. And then case studies, which I wish Santa Fe was one of them. In short, a Swedish town that had to relocate its downtown because of mining subsidence. It was caving in on itself way up north in Lapland. I went up and looked at it and looked at the new town and how they were deciding what to relocate. Do we just do an architectural style? Do we take the whole town hall? And people were asking, well, what about that bench? That's where I met my husband. What about the cemetery of this classic church, one of the most noted country churches in Sweden? These are the things that come up. And fortunately, they had the money to think about that stuff because it was funded by the mining company as well as the government. Other examples include some great architects, young architects in Ireland who wanted to bring back the old Irish market towns. This was an exhibit at the Architecture Biennale in Venice in 2019. I befriended them, learned a lot about that. More importantly, Apple trying to impose its town square model in Stockholm and Melbourne, and they got thrown out because they didn't do their homework. They were trying to impose a model, a global model, without learning the local context, as I'm suggesting one should do here. So that's what that book is about. Now I have concluding slides. It's all in the handout. It talks about the role of the learn process. It talks about this being a collective process as well. And the question is, who are the conveners? Are they the city? Maybe. But are they organizations like yours? Yes. And I know that's what Melanie's trying to do. And in meeting Melanie, 2 parts. 1, Chuck, why are you here? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, oh, not existentially. And then 2, she was asking, she asked me kindly to sort of take a look at the organization and so on and so forth. And I said, I really like the curating side and the symposium and all that you're doing to encourage people with different perspectives. And there's nothing wrong with that being preservation-based, by the way. I'm not critiquing that. But drawing people in, convene. So it's collective. And that was the rail yard and the farmer's market, by the way, in one of those photos. Here we're on East Palace, and the idea is understanding the historical depth and all of the eras of Santa Fe that we know about. Here we are La Mama, which could be Don Gaspar or another bungalowish place. Here's the internment memorial, and here's a shaded interior in the art museum to be ethereal, to make you think about connections and absences and historical layers. And a couple of the absences that I haven't talked about are like the Buffalo Soldiers and the role of black soldiers in protecting the Santa Fe Trail, and who were those workers that Archbishop Lamy brought here, to whom some of you may be related, and all that stuff, all this, all the silent stuff that really, though, as the great landscape urban, it wasn't so much an urban, so the great cultural landscape guy, John Brinkerhoff Jackson, who lived here, and Chris Wilson was the J.B. Jackson chair at UNM. After I wrote this, I went back and looked at his contribution to the Lafarge book. One of the contributions to the Lafarge book, written in 1955, and I felt good because he said, hey, it was about the Acequias and the plaza. And I thought, okay, well, at least I know what I'm doing. Inside the palace in the courtyard, more of the same, traditions and impact, these things that carry through here that are a little bit different than the rest of the country, not only because of the origin stories, but the other thing about New Mexico, as you well know, is this strange confluence of incomplete movements that have created this marvelous, we had Manifest Destiny and kind of a little more impotent Spanish conquistador, although by no means, neutral, and the merger with the Pueblo cultures, and it's something to dig really deep about, and the Historical Museum does that very well. Collective role I've already talked about. I'm hinting the Vladim, the architecture of the Baca. This is what Anthony and others would want more of. Yes, no, maybe. In context, where, and so on and so forth. And then a purposefully vacuous concluding slide here, which That's a sign for the new O'Keeffe, but it's in Spanish. And here's the opera, an ongoing force. Here's that blank space in Cerrillos. And the idea is it's an extraordinary canvas, but how can you play more of a role in contributing to what it becomes? And I'm not sure Santa Fe Forward will do that without the efforts of the private side and the nonprofits. In other cities, maybe, maybe not. I want to, one word to the wise. This is really important. I say here, probably quoting myself, that in facing the future and thinking about how to leverage place, stakeholders often use the terms such as authenticity and character. And what I end up saying here is, those are just words and they don't mean anything outside of context. So, let's protect the character of Santa Fe. What's that mean? What's that mean? And you may have an answer and it's fine, but at least think about the fact that it's not automatically La Fonda. And at some point along the way, I got to write 3 books about this, and I don't know what to do next. Thank you. There's fountains from the plaza, water fountains, and I think I'm a little over.
Chuck, I've got an anecdote for you that I think everybody would enjoy pondering. I can't tell you how many times we've had friends, visitors here to Santa Fe who think that the entire city has a historic ordinance because they look at subdivisions, far south and west, and they look at Cerrillos Road, and they think that the use of earth-colored stucco on flat roof buildings is mandated.
Yeah.
And I have to tell them, no, in fact, the historic district's only a small part of the city. It's a building tradition. People have chosen now for 70 or more years, and I'm talking about modern housing construction. They choose to build in that style, not because somebody told them they had to.
Yeah, I think and then my sense is that that's this long-term sort of social cohesion that Jackson spoke of 50 years ago, that derives from the idea that you can almost trace it to the, maybe overly romantically so, but the notion that the Spanish settlements were, whatever you say about them in what they did, how they changed the landscape, they were protective in nature and they were communal in nature, and people weren't so interested in buying and selling property. They were interested in preserving a community ethic. They all fought with each other. There was stratification and so on and so forth. But I'll tell you, that is what's the city different, as well as the architecture. I've never seen, by the way, other than maybe in Santa Barbara or maybe in Charleston, I've never seen something as successful as what it tried to do, the city different moniker.